Everybody back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamone, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self-acceptance and step into their personal power. This podcast is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories along with practical tools and actionable insights that can help guide you along your healing journey. Today, I have an awesome guest for us. His name is Alan. He's a divorce coach, educator, and outdoor adventurer who believes healing doesn't always happen on a therapist's couch. Sometimes it happens on a trail, covered in sweat and swearing at your backpack. After his own divorce left him in questioning everything, he started Crooked Trail Coaching to help others find purpose and maybe a little peace along the way through vision, adventure, and saying yes to themselves again. His message, you don't have to stay stuck. You just have to start moving. So, Alan, I want to welcome you onto the podcast.
Man, it's so good to be back. It's a pleasure chatting with you again. I know when we got off the call, the first time we talked, it's like, man, I think I just made a new friend, right? And I shared that with all the other people that I was talking with that day. So good to see you again.
Yeah, likewise. I felt the same way, like I had made a new friend. And for our listeners today, Alan has actually climbed Mount Rainier, close to where I live over in the Seattle area. And I haven't had the chance to climb that mountain myself yet, but gotta admit, I was a little bit jealous you got to climb that sucker and cap the peak on that.
Well, when you're ready to climb something in Indiana, come on down.
Definitely. Well, Alan, I wanted to give you some time as we start the podcast just to share with listeners a little bit more about yourself and a little bit about your grief journey. I know you went through a divorce a little while ago that really set you on a different path in life and shockingly puts you back into alignment of who you really are.
Yeah, for sure. First, I just appreciate you having me. I know nothing is free, right? Especially time. That's our most valuable asset. So thanks for spending some time with me and to your listeners too. My divorce, yeah. The story is kind of long, and I'll try to keep it brief, right? We chatted about this. Originally, I was going to climb big mountains and carry heavy loads. That was what I wanted to do. And I even sought out a path. I did a semester course with the National Outdoor Leadership School. I went to Prescott College in Arizona specifically to do wilderness leadership with the goal of just humping big loads up very big mountains, the adventure lifestyle. And right as I got an internship to go to Nepal, found out that we were pregnant with our first child. And that seemed irresponsible to head off and jet set across the world and climb dangerous things with a new baby on the way. So I sort of readjusted some of my goals, and that in and of itself was probably the start of some dominoes. So I made a compromise, which by all means was a good compromise at the time, and shifted into outdoor education. So I spent some time in the classroom and some time in the woods, which is what I still do, and I love them both. But through that compromise, instead of living in Colorado or in Washington or doing those things all the time, I ended up back in Indiana. There are no big mountains here. That was a joke at the beginning of the podcast. And little by little, I just felt more and more of myself being drained, right? Or me giving it away. I don't want to blame anybody. No one drained it from me. I just gave it away little at a time and didn't realize I was doing it. And so one night, my ex-wife now asked me, how was your day? And I just had this moment. I was like, I'd had enough. It was a long day. I was pretty bored. And I said, I lashed out. And I said, it was the same day I had yesterday, and it's probably the same day I'm going to have tomorrow. And as I said it, I just kept going. And one of these days I'm going to be 40 and it's not going to be good enough and I'm going to leave. Like I remember just saying that, and the way I felt like that was an awful thing to say to someone. And also I was really feeling that. And so we did lots of stuff. We did marriage counseling. We had another child, and they were all band-aids, but it never got to the heart of what was going on. And so eventually, a couple of trial separations led to a divorce. And I was crushed because I was certain that I'm not good at much, but I was going to be really, really good at being someone's partner. And I was going to be really, really good at being a father. And that was the most important thing. and I felt like I failed. And it was my fault because I chose to leave the marriage. And I think that's something that the people that I work with maybe don't fully understand up front. We think that maybe the people who are really grieving are the ones who were left. But the person who leaves also feels a ton of that. There's the guilt, there's the shame, there's how did I not make that work when that was so important? And so I carried on with adventuring. I carried on with instead of big mountains, I turned to ultra marathons. And the tie there was it's a thing I don't know if I'm going to complete. Right? Just like a mountain, you never know if you're going to make it or not. And an ultra marathon is very much the same way. And so I started finding other ways to feed that portion of myself. And then what I found was I'm becoming a better version of me for everyone else. And so that's really the message that I try to share with people that I work with is that when we work on ourselves, when we express ourselves in the truest fashion, then we can think about being there for someone else, or then we can think about all the other stuff.
I think that's a powerful analogy that you gave, because you and I both have climbing backgrounds. I have a big hiking background, but you've got a climbing background, and not always are we going to make it to that trailhead. We're not always going to make it up to that peak. We're not always going to make it up there because we may run into a river crashing through a trail that we just can't cross, or we end up in a situation where a crevasse opened up and a ladder fell down. And that's it. We can't cross it, and so we oftentimes have to turn back. I thought that was such a powerful analogy for what you described with this life. Because I remember this first conversation you and I had where you said, I had this big envisioning of, being the best father, being the best husband, and then life just went 180 on me because I had a lot of needs not being met for myself. And I thought it was really powerful how you really had that focus, not it came across like you didn't have a lot of anger. It was just very much like a recognition and a consciousness of seeing this shift happening, and taking action towards that shift to get you back in alignment with who you are.
Yeah, I think time and space helps with that for sure. I'm certainly not angry now. I'm sure that I was then, especially with the initial outburst, because I did feel blame and I did feel like something was being taken from me in some ways. And so it took a lot of work to say, that's about you, buddy. That's not about anybody else. And it's no one else's job to make sure you're satisfied, right? You show up as the best version of yourself, and the people who appreciate that will stick like glue. And the people who don't appreciate it, well, you repelled them, and that's good for you also.
Yeah, I think that's really important as I've learned on this grief journey is really taking, I call it taking inventory of the people in your life. And there's people that are going to pull you back and drain energy from you or kind of shift you out of alignment with who you're really meant to be and what you're meant to go do. And oftentimes, sometimes those are the people, by the way, we're close to. And it's hard to let go. It's hard to accept they're just not meant to be on our journey at this point. It can be a very hard place.
So hard. And I think we talked about this before as well. I tend to get two types of people. Someone asked me, do you work with women and men, and is that weird? And no, it's not weird. Yes, I do work with women and men. And they said, well, does one act one way and one act the other way? And I don't think it's a gender thing at all. I think that the people that I find that are hardest to work with initially and who probably aren't a good fit right away are those who want to blame and complain and just get in that cycle of misery. They call it venting, but really that's a myth, right? That's just a negative feedback loop. And if that's what you're after, there's Facebook groups for you out there. They will bitch and complain all day long. Um,
Yes.
and then the other people who I think really struggle are the really tough exterior. Like nothing hurts me because that's not true either. And you're not accessing that part of you. That's half of your humanity that you are ignoring. And so when we can face the disappointment, we can face the anger, we can face the shame in ourselves, we can face all of that stuff, and then we can feel all that, but then we can change what the story really means or what it was. We can get rid of the blame piece of it or the I'm not good enough piece of it and just be like, yeah, that sucked. That really hurt. And it still hurts sometimes, right? Um, but that's the path, I think, for me.
You brought up the topic of blame, and I think that's a really good topic, especially in the
Mm.
grief place, because on our grief journeys and in society as a whole, by the way, it's very easy to point the finger at the other person and say, I blame you for this, I blame you for that, I blame you for this circumstance. And oftentimes we don't take time to look back within ourselves. I remember watching Tony Robbins' I'm Not Your Guru on Netflix, and it's stuck in my head because of how powerful this moment was related to blame. And there was a daughter in the first probably 20 minutes of that movie, blaming her dad for being a drug addict, not being in her life. And he abruptly interjected and said, if you're going to blame people for all the bad shit they do to you, you better blame them for all the good they give you too. And it shocked my world when I heard that because I've always heard blame in a negative context. I never thought about it in a positive. And I think when we go through grief, we have a lot of very hard emotions, very heavy emotions. We're always quick to say, this is what didn't work out because of this person. But when we flip that mirror around and we look at it at ourselves and say, what was my contribution to this? What actions did I take? What things did I say? How did I respond to this? And oftentimes, by the way, that's very scary because we're not used to pointing the finger this way at us. We're very used to going outwards with it. And so it gives us an opportunity, by the way, to say, maybe I could have done something different. Maybe I could have handled something better, or maybe I could have said that a little nicer, or said that in a different way that's more receptive in our conversations with people. So I love that you talk about blame in that context, by the way, because that's a very place of authenticity and self-acceptance, and also learning and growing through that chapter of life.
Yeah, and how do we get there, right? Oftentimes it is space or time, and then plenty of humility also. Like we have to realize that I was not perfect in that moment, and be willing to just sit with that. That's why I enjoy. We talked about Stoic philosophy a bit, because it's all about that space between what happened and how am I going to react to it. And so by pausing, we can almost in a way speed up that time to give us perspective. You take that time, take a break, really zoom out and see what exactly is going on here beyond that initial way that I want to react. Instead, just just view it like an observer, like a tourist in my own life. Like just look around. What actually is happening here? Oh, right. I'm a part of this, and that helps.
That's been a big philosophy I've taken in my life in a lot of ways, and it's I'll share with listeners just because Alan shared this with me in the first interview too. When you become the observer of your life, or even in that moment where you've got a tense opposition with someone, and you become the observer and picture yourself being 10 or 20 or 30 feet over, watching this whole argument happen or this whole situation, whatever it may be, and you're just sitting there watching it, and you're just saying, I see this, I feel this, I hear this, I understand this. And you don't really have emotions there in that space, but you have observation. And when you get into that place of observation and the emotions are removed from it, you can actually see that situation from a whole different perspective. And a lot of times, back to Alan's point, that space between reacting to a situation and responding to a situation is exactly what being the observer gives us. And a lot of times, we're able to then at that point respond differently to that situation. And sometimes no response is a response. Other times it's, I had harsh feelings about this, but now I see this thing in a different light, and I now understand why this unfolded the way it did. And it puts you in that place to take accountability and ownership for your contributions to that situation, but also at the same time, understanding how it evolved and unfolded, and maybe even that perspective of that other person to better understand them and finding a means of common ground that works.
And we get better at it, right? It's we talked about grief and not comparing it. I think that was super important. Something that was in one of your shows before, and I wish I could remember which one it is now, but one of you said, you don't have to compare grief because when it's the worst thing that's ever happened to you, that's the worst thing that's ever happened to you. It's not compared to somebody else. And so if I'm working with seventh and eighth graders and their boyfriend or girlfriend dumps them, that's the worst thing that's ever happened to them, or at least today, right? But each time we face something like that, we get that chance to grow from it, or it shifts that Overton window of what is grief. For us, we laugh at that now, right? But we've already dealt with the seventh and eighth grade breakup, and then we dealt with the high school breakup, and then we dealt with the divorce. And so the things that feel trivial to some people that's a luxury because we have that perspective because we've already gone through it.
You're jugging my memory from the conversation we had about, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but there
Mm.
was a student of yours that passed away, and I don't remember the circumstance of that. You can elaborate on that for me. I
Mhm.
remember you sharing going to school that day and having to communicate that this student was no longer alive and there, and having to watch seventh and eighth graders experience grief in that capacity. And you even talked about your own experience of saying, I have to go deliver this news to a bunch of students, and this isn't
Mhm.
going to be talking to somebody like us that's 30 to 45 years old. It's not going to be that conversation. It's going to be students who have not experienced this part of life in that capacity and don't have the yeah, emotional or mental growth that you have at those later years of life that you would be back then. Because, like you said, the worst thing that might happen to a seventh, eighth grader in most circumstances is like breaking up with a girlfriend or something, or losing a friendship at that point. But having to deliver that hard news to them, I remember you saying just how difficult that was to go through that
Yeah,
process.
and it maybe is a good example of what I was referring to, that we get better at it. When I was younger, when I was out of college, well, when I was even younger than that, my cousin died by suicide. I was 21, I think. So I had to deal with that. That's harsh. That's sudden. That's grief. Um, a few years later, my former roommate, who I worked with closely in that moment, died by suicide. And I was this second person on scene, right? And these are crushing things, and they're difficult. And I remember one of the hardest things was having to call his business associates in California and tell them what happened. And I just didn't know how to do it. Very similar to when I had a divorce, when I was divorced for 6 months. I couldn't even say the word divorce because it was just so unwieldy and it was not a part of my prior experience. And so having gone through those things gave me a different perspective for sure. And honoring that these kiddos, bringing it back to the present day, had never experienced anything like this. I got the call at 5:30 in the morning. Did you hear about it? I was like, no, what happened? And so then I get this information via text message. And this is a shining star. In obituaries, everybody's a shining star. This kid is a shining star. Bright smile, baked bread for one of our things that we do here at school is we have jobs 1 day a week. She was in charge of the kitchen and she baked bread and sold it at Carline. They just an amazing kiddo. And I remember all that morning before the kids came in, just thinking, this is going to be a seminal memory. This is something they will never, ever forget. And so, how do we do this tactfully? How do we do this gently? How do we love them in this moment? And I remembered something that I heard on a podcast a million years ago while I was training. Tell the truth all the time with compassion. And I just felt like that's the answer, right? I just have to tell them that. And I do have to be blunt about it. And I do have to say the words that I don't want to say because they have to hear them and they have to know that this is how we handle these things and we can get through it, and it is ugly. And me not saying it is not going to make it not true. And so let's figure out a way to do this. And so I just remember saying that almost exact same thing to them. This is my 19th year at this school, and this is the worst day I've ever had, and this is why. And our friend died last night, and it was just like, wow. Now how do we handle that? Really, not a great day.
Yeah, I can imagine because there's there's an array of emotions that come up in that situation that I try to share this with people with grief. You can experience sadness, frustration, anger, depression, overwhelm. You can feel emptiness, you can feel numb, you can feel all those things all at once in the matter of 5 seconds of hearing news like that. And that's a lot for any person to process. I don't care what you went through loss wise, it's a lot for one person to process. And that's something that, that's why I say grief takes time for people. There's some people that might do it in 3 months. It might take somebody else 10 years. It's really a very personal process for someone to go through. And I can't imagine what that was like to tell a school full of children that and to see all the different reactions of people and also trying to for lack of a better term, preempt how some might feel because there's going to be some students that are way more affected by it than others, and there might be people down the middle of the road with that. So there's just an array of different responses to grief that you must have faced that day.
Yeah, and what a teachable moment. I'm super fortunate. The people I work with are my community in a lot of ways, in my other life, right outside of school. And so we have such a strong bond here. It's a Montessori school, so we spend a ton of time on social emotional learning. And so what a teachable moment that we all grieve in different ways, and you're going to see it in front of your eyes. You're going to have kids who giggle uncomfortably. They don't mean to, but that's their reaction, and that is their reaction. That's it's okay. That's how they expressed it. They didn't think it was funny. They just didn't know what to do with themselves. Their body literally didn't know what to do with themselves. And that causes friction because the people who were her best friends are devastated by that. And now I'm mad at you because of that. You're not really mad at them. You're mad because your friend is gone. And so having all of those conversations and still having those conversations. One of the kids today, this was back in October, one of the kids today was like, I'm just having a really hard day. And it was cafe day, right? They're cooking and they're making bread. And it just reminds them, I was like, yeah, I get it. Go take a break.
Yeah,
Certainly not linear. It things
it's
pop up all the time. Things pop up from my divorce from 13 years ago. It doesn't mean I want to be married again to that person, but it certainly just feels like, oof, yeah, I could have done that better. That wasn't a great moment for me.
I think life is filled with so many of those teachable moments, especially the grief process. Because I think one of the things I've shared with people about grief is that, it's a lot like driving your car down the freeway at 100 miles an hour and slamming on the brakes as hard as you can. Grief
Yeah.
is a lot like that. And you end up in those moments, by the way, reflecting on certain moments of your life. You start end up looking at, like you said, something will remind you of the divorce you had. Something might remind you of your roommate. Something might pop up in your peripheral that day. It might be 10 years from that moment, but it'll come back to you. And then you end up reflecting on it. And so grief is never really linear at all. I think some days, you feel fine and you feel like you can move on with life. Other days it's like a ton of bricks hit you in the head and you're just going, I don't know how to pick this up today. I just don't know how to move forward. And just, like you said with that child that was in the cafe day today, just saying, hey, it's okay to take a break. It's okay to give yourself some space to process that. And I think that's something that I wish we would do more in the grief community with people who are grieving is tell them like it's okay to feel those things. It's okay if you need a break from work today. It's okay if you need a break from this. Because there's days we just can't control it.
Yeah, not only okay, but it's vital. You have to do it. You have to get in there because it doesn't go away. You you feel differently about it or your emotions around it might change, but it doesn't go away. My roommate's death was almost 20 years ago, and I was driving just this past weekend um, past a stretch of road that looked a lot like the old farm that where I lived with them, helping take care of this place. And just all at once, like it was like, oh, whoa, that is just like Charles's farm. And then all these feelings come back. Like, man, I've had 20 years to deal with this, and here it is. I get to the giggling and the laughing about it much more quickly now because I can filter out the initial shock and the loss and get back to, oh yeah, that was the first time I ever went 100 miles an hour in a car. Wonder where that old Mustang is now. That sort of thing comes
Yeah.
up.
And I think that's part of the grief process too, that not a lot of people see or acknowledge with themselves. But grief transforms, it never goes away. And I think that's something that I've tried to share with a lot of people going through it right here, right now. And I try to say, you're where you need to be right now, and that's okay. And there's days that you don't feel good. That's okay too. But you're going to get to that place where you'll have those moments of going, oh, snap, like saw Charles Barn today, or for me, that can be watching kids play on the playground. I say, wow, what my kid be like today if he was here. But I have those moments though where I celebrate that person instead of feeling all the pain of that situation because that can be the hardest part of those moments of grief is looking back on the shocking moment that happened where it all started. That's the hard part to look back on. But then we also find that, when we do lose somebody close to us, like a roommate or a grandparent or somebody like that, somebody we've had a lot of time with, oftentimes it starts to get not replaced, but it gets to be in a place where we celebrate their lives and we celebrate saying, "Yeah, God, I had this experience with them," or "Yeah, I remember that time we went and did this." And it turns into something that through that celebration process that allows us to grieve in a more positive light. It allows us to just have that celebration of that person.
Yeah, who was I around that person? Why did I like that so much? You said when we were talking, all trauma is formative, I think was your quote. I'm like, yeah, man, that's it right there.
Yeah, because trauma reshapes who we are, and we're not really going to be the same person we were before our trauma as we are going to be after our trauma. And that's a lot like a lot of the hiking I've done. I've done some rough trails. I'll say that I've done some off trail stuff, and I can say it's in a lot of ways it's like grief. It's a big sludge through the forest. I mean, I don't know if you've bushwhacked before,
Mhm.
um, with a machete and whatnot, but I've done that. And you don't know what you're stepping on. You don't know what's going to whack you in the face. Cussing at your backpack, like you said in your bio, I've had that happen many times. Um, but when you do get to that final destination on that trail, that's a lot of a similarity to what grief feels like. And grief is getting hit in the face with branches when you least expect it, or trying to cut yourself loose from something that wrapped on your foot. But when you do get to that, you get to that destination of things, it doesn't always feel like you get there and you say, "My God, this is a rough trip." You're like sweating, cussing and stuff. And then you get there and say, "Well, I made it." And grief is really a lot like that. It's very much a messy process of a bushwhacking trail. But you get to that place where, you're transformed at that point. You said, "Now I've conquered something. I've actually learned something about myself through this process. And now that I've become this new person, and I have to meet this new person, by the way. I have to meet the post-divorce Alan, the post stillborn Chris. I got to meet this person and figure out who they are and what kind of gifts they have to offer the world. It's a very, very transformative process."
You nailed it. It's so good.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, since then, have you done, I know you got into ultra marathons.
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about that process, because that can be an arduous process doing a 150 to 200-mile run. And I think there's a lot of ties to grief with that because you've got a lot of time to think when you're in that
So
process.
much, so much. And you meet some interesting characters because most people who do it have a screw loose in some way, right? Um, the training part of it, though, is the part really that I think about most with that because I remember the 6 a.m. runs before the sun's coming up in January and watching the lights come on in the city below. And I remember uh, the construction workers on a cold morning that were burning their scraps, and I was running past them, and they were like, "What is this guy doing out here?" Or running with a headlamp on at 10 p.m. because it's the only time I could get my miles in that day. Where it's there's something about building that grit and building up the resolve and having a vision, which is a thing I talk about all the time. I do workshops on like what is your vision, and then how do you just build the tiny little blocks every day to get there. And so uh, dopamine is released in the wanting. And so it makes it having the plan is awesome. It feels good. Running 100 miles does not feel good. There's nothing about it that's fun. And one of the races I did was 25 degrees. There were 8 water crossings that were knee deep. It was just miserable almost the whole day. And then when you finish, like it's a great achievement, and no one gives a shit. No one cares. You still have to answer emails on Monday. You still have to empty the dishwasher. It matters not one iota, except that you kept the promise to yourself. And I think that's the big thing. And learning to even set a goal like that is hope. That's what it is. And so when I talk to people who have gone through some sort of a transition, mostly divorce. Some people lost a job, they lost a loved one, they moved into a new town, they don't know anybody, and are just trying to get themselves going again. It's that hope piece. Like, what is the vision? What are the things that really light you up? And then how can you fit that into your day or into your week? But never go more than a week without doing one of those things. And so I provide all these categories and all these things. But um, the idea of the unknown, I think, is a huge piece of it. Like, I don't know if I'm going to finish. That's why I love mountaineering, other than it's just beautiful. And I like doing physical things. Um, but I hated running when I was a kid. I was a baseball player. Running was a punishment. I hated it. And then I moved back to Indiana and I had a friend and he was like, I'm training for this 50-mile race. Like, well, that's bullshit because no one runs that far. And and then he introduces me to this whole world. And he's like, you kind of like it. It's dirty and you get to eat a lot and it's just like mountaineering. You've spent 12, 13-hour days on a trail before. So go run a 50 miler. I was like, well, maybe. And yeah, off we go. I think it's just having the audacity, right, to say, I'm going to go do this thing that's pretty outlandish and quite pointless, by the way. I think whimsy also matters. And yeah, it shakes you out of whatever the routines are and gets you really thinking about what matters to you and how can you salve that in some way.
How do you maintain your your mental grit when you're going on those 50-mile races? I mean, I've heard a lot that there's people that run and you almost hit like a brick wall, almost like you do in grief sometimes. You just hit this wall of like, I don't have to do this. I don't want to do this. I mean, why am I doing this right now? And then something switches in you at that point and you kind of push past the wall.
Yeah, I think it's different for everyone. I think knowing that you put the miles in, that you did the work is part of it. I've never started a race and said, this is going to be fun the whole way through because you know it's going to be hard. It just is. And so when you get to that point, you're like, oh, it's hard now. Right. I expected this. So I'm trained for it. And if I really was about comfort, I wouldn't have signed up in the first place. And so get on with it. There's probably an aid station not too far away, and they probably have peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, and you'll be real happy. And so that's it. I mean, I think it's just a matter of um, it's important to me to do what I said I was going to do. And so that's a big piece of it for me. You said you were going to do it, so just go do it. Um, I think it's different for different people though. And on a different day, it could be different for me. It could be you it could be you don't want to go tell anybody that you didn't make it. You don't want to DNF but did not finish. It could be you're going for a personal record. Now I'm going to try to beat my time. Maybe you're one of those runners. I'm not a person who's ever going to be really fast at it. I'm not built like a runner, right? I'm 6'2" and 200 pounds. I'm not made to run a lot like that, or at least not fast. Um, yeah, I think the reasons vary wildly why people do it. I met a lot of people who are in recovery from drugs or alcohol. And I think in some ways maybe they moved one compulsion into another, but it's a much healthier one for sure. It's a different expression of needing to do something regularly and getting that runner's high, as it were. Lots and lots of reasons.
So I wanted to ask you, since you said that you work with a lot of people in the divorce arena, what kind of griefs do you see from people commonly that you work with? Are there some specific commonalities with grief that you've noticed over your career as a coach in that area?
Yeah, for sure. People are shocked. People can't believe that it happened. Why would they ever do that? People feel not good enough. They just traded me for someone else, or they're going to trade me for someone else. I think that is a big one, the lack of self-esteem. Most of the time when people come to me, they get who I am. There's enough stuff that I've written and or they've met me or I host a journaling group at a wine shop once a month. And so they kind of get where I'm going. I'm going to push them to try to do something cool, hopefully. Try to do something fun, try to do something that's hard. Um, but what it comes down to is just what's your identity? And when I got divorced, a lot of that was shaken. We had the same friends. We had some of the same hobbies. We went to the same restaurants. And so how do you divide that up? We talk about dividing up houses or cars or possessions, but how do you divide up the friends? How do you divide up oh no, this is the thing that I like to do, and you like to do it too. You can't do that anymore. And also the questioning, like, did I really even like that? I just went along for the ride. Well, shit, what do I like? I don't even know. And so those are the people that are in my wheelhouse where they feel, and some of them are just stalled out in a career, quite frankly. It's some of them are not divorced folks, but they have that in common that they are just, they feel like they've gone with the flow for so long that they were not making intentional choices in their lives. They were really reacting, whether it's to the alarm in the morning or, what are we going to have for lunch? We just do the same thing every day just because. And why do you do that? Well, I don't really know. Well, what do you want to do? And this is the commonality with my middle schoolers. I don't know what I want to do. What do you like? I don't know what I like. Like, what do you mean you don't know what I like? I like 12 different things by noon. Be curious, find something, and then just explore it for a while. I think shiny object syndrome gets a bad name. I
I,
think go explore, man. How do you know what you like if you don't check out a lot of different stuff?
I think that's a great thing that you brought up, shiny object syndrome, because I've always been told, you chase so many things, you start so many things and don't finish them. And I said, well, that's okay because you learn what you like and learn what you don't like. And to your point that you just said though, you'll never know unless you try. And that's I remember doing a trail called Lake Serene over in Index up in the North Cascades, and this trail damn near almost killed me. I'm not gonna lie to you. And it was my piss poor planning, by the way, because I didn't bring enough food and water. And long story short, I almost passed out a half mile from the car. Just I've never run my body so low before in energy. But I'll just say that hike has more stairs than I think there are stairs to heaven. It was awful. That I learned through that. I've always loved hiking. That trail made me hate hiking for a very long time after that. But I'll just say that it was a real testament to find out my body was capable of so much more than I ever put it through tenfold. And I learned that day that I said, even if I go through the worst situation or I'm on a trail I just can't stand, I can make it. I can do this. And um, you just don't know unless you try. That's
That's that shift we were talking about that happens with grief. Like I went through this thing. Now the next thing that comes up, I I have some experience to draw on. Like, oh, I can anticipate a little bit. The next trail that someone else says, oh, this one's so hard, you're gonna be like, oh, okay, I'll try it. And come back and in your head, you're like, that trail is not hard. Let me tell you about this other one. You don't want to one up them, but you know in your own mind, you're like, uh-huh,
yeah, well, I
got
think
this
that's
one
the
in my
big
back pocket.
exactly. Yeah, it's just fun. It's funny out here in Seattle because everybody says like, "Oh, I'm gonna go hike the Lake Serene Trail," and I'm like, "Man, you better prepare for that, or you're gonna be in for a bad time." I'm gonna tell you that. It's crazy because it's a really beautiful trail. It's an awesome, you damn near almost kill yourself getting to the lake, but once you get up there, it's freaking amazing. You got 3,000 foot views over one side and Mount Index towering over you on Lake Serene up there. It's a beautiful thing. But when you don't plan ahead for it, it's just absolutely brutal. Um,
Careful, man. We're gonna get crushed under all these metaphors. That's one right there, huh? You got to work for it,
but
but it's worth it. It's gonna be beautiful.
But that's what I think grief, really does for us. And I've noticed that I couldn't say these things 5 years ago in my own experience, but I'll just say that, after going through, watching someone pass away in front of me, losing my kid, going through all these big changes of grief, I'm a better person for them. I don't have hardship towards it. I don't have, and I'm curious about your take on that with your experiences. I feel like what you said there about the next thing's easier. Well, it's easier because your thing that was awful was like up here now. And now when things just come right here, you go, I've seen worse, I've experienced worse. It's not to one up things, but it's almost like checking yourself and saying, I can do this. Like I can actually do this.
Yeah, it's your suffering thermostat, maybe. If it's set really, really high, then most things get put in their proper place. I won't say they're trivial, but you can put them in their proper place. I don't freak out if somebody cuts me off in traffic. Like, okay, I hope that's the worst thing that happens to me today. Big deal. Right? There's a long line at the airport. I might miss my flight. Great. Look at me. I'm able to go fly wherever the hell I want to go. Like, so what? Get
Yeah.
another one. Big deal. These are not things that should shake us to our core. Like the things that shake us to our core are the loss of a loved one. I cannot. We went through a miscarriage, right? But to lose a child, a stillborn child, I can never imagine what that would be, right? I don't have to imagine that, fortunately, but I can commiserate because we have these other things to draw on, and I can say to you, I don't know how that feels, but man, I feel for you, right? It does
Yeah, and
make us better at that.
I think that's what grief does give us too, is just a big, I mean, it's happened to me through all the grief I've gone through, but it makes us more compassionate and empathetic people. And just like you said too, it's funny you brought that up about getting cut off on traffic and all of those other examples. I had somebody else tell me the other day who's really going through grief really bad right now. They just lost somebody. And they told me, I just don't really have like patience to give energy towards things like that in my life. All these little things that I thought were problems every day, they're not problems anymore. In fact, they go sailing over my head or in one ear out the other. I don't even have the mental capacity to entertain them. And they talked about how when you go through grief, you start to really care more about the things that actually matter, the things that don't just kind of drift off in the distance.
Yeah, and that's how we can talk about it without sounding trite. Uh, When you said we move forward, it's not moving on. You're not just putting it in the rearview mirror and pretending it never happened, but you do have to wake up the next day. You do have to do the next thing. And so you can use that as that informative experience, like you said.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of people have wrong about grief is this like let it go and move on type of mentality. And I think it writes off, who we are as humans. And I've always said that, I don't care what your background is, I don't care what you identify yourself with. Human to human experiences, we all live in emotion, we live in feelings. And so to deny ourselves that human emotion or that human connection when we're going through grief is denying ourselves the opportunity to process it the way we need to, and also denying ourselves that growth opportunity. There's, back to our hiking and mountain analogies of things, I've been on trails I never finished. I've been on trails that I used to go explore abandoned mines. And there were mines I couldn't find 3 or 4 times. I get really annoyed. And again, you're bushwhacking, so the trail's not there. But I always kept that thing saying, I got close. I'm gonna do it again. I got close, do it again. And then I eventually found it. And I think with grief, when you move forward, it's just taking grief with you and knowing that grief is going to be that thing that pushes you forward in life. And it's never going to leave you, but it's going to make you a better person.
Yeah, it just builds all of the best parts of us. It requires us to it, if we're moving through it, it requires us to lean on other people. And in that way, you build community. You show that vulnerability. You kind of drop all the pretense and feel this whole human experience. And then in so doing, I think it's why you and I connected the way that we did. It just felt like this is not a person who is talking around the subject. This is a person who's living the subject, who is willing to take chances with exposing parts of themselves that um, are hard and that feel, in my case, feels less than because I felt like I failed at something. Or when you open up, you allow other people to experience that with you in a lot of ways, and to show that yeah, we're not alone. We can all do these things, and when we do them together, it opens up that space for what's the next thing. I have no doubt you and I are going to go hiking in Washington at some point, right? Just because
Definitely.
because of a handful of conversations. Then you're like, okay, yeah, great, because this is a person who's real and who wants those sorts of things.
Well, I think that's what's really that's what I liked about you when I first met you on our Zoom call. Is just you were so open about your story about grief, open about going through that divorce, losing your roommate to suicide. You went through some very painful moments of life, and what I thought was so I don't have another word for it, but what was so beautiful about your story is you described how these things that happened to you at a much younger age than where you are today have really made you just a more compassionate, understanding person and a more empathetic individual. And you were able to take these experiences of life that you had that in some ways derailed you from things, but they pushed you on the path that you're on now. And then you're in this place where you're a coach now and you're taking people to Arcadia, Maine, which I'm actually jealous. I wish I could join you.
It's
Um,
happening.
but you get to take people out into the wilderness and into nature to help them work through and navigate those losses, navigate that grief they're going through, and to really help them discover their acceptance and discover their own journey. And so I can't help but feel like all those things that happen, they happen for you. And they made you into this great person that you are today. And I saw the humbleness come through you in that first call. And I just thought that was a powerful view of the experiences you've had in life.
Too much. We're recording this, right? I want to share that with my wife.
Yes.
No, I think when you list off uh, those things, none of them are extraordinary. Like that's the human condition. That is what we all have in common. When you say you experienced uh, a roommate dying by suicide or a divorce or this, everybody does that. Like that's being alive, and that goes back to what we were talking about with just feeling it all. You can't have these super high highs without knowing that at some point they go away or they wouldn't feel that high, right? Um, Happiest day of your life up to that point, wedding day. the the birth of your child, the least happiest day of your life, divorce, and they're inextricably, they're tied, right? They go together. One could not have happened without the other. And so I think about this Jason Isbell song. I don't know if you know Jason Isbell. If you don't, like, what are people doing with their lives? Go learn about it. But the song Vampires, right? If we lived forever, none of this stuff would matter. We wouldn't feel like we had to do the little things like hold somebody's hand or give them compliments or whatever, however the song goes. And that's just it. All of it ends. Like all of the really cool stuff ends. My best friend's life, I knew was going to end. I just didn't want it to end in that way, but it was going to. And this happens for everybody. All of us have this in common. And so that's the embracing piece of just being so real about it feels natural to me. It feels natural to you. I don't often understand the disconnect that some people have with, well, I'm going to just hide my feelings or I'm not going to experience this thing. I'm like, well, then you're not going to experience the awesome parts either. How can you do that to yourself? Um,
Yeah.
Expose the wire a little bit and enjoy life.
I think that's really powerful what you just said because unfortunately society has wired all of us to hide and suppress our emotions and feelings. Don't be angry. Oh, grief is a part of life. Get over it. And I think being raw in that place, I've recently had the experience to coach somebody who is suicidal, by the way. And I keep this person anonymous for obvious reasons, but I'll just say the following. He opened up to me on a coaching call one day on a really bad day he had last month, and this guy got real with his emotions beyond comprehension. I mean, I was shocked. And I also at the same time was incredibly amazed, and I applauded this individual, by the way, because he didn't hold back from his emotions at all. He dove in that thing like jumping off a mountain. Um, and I told him, I said, you might think you're scared right now because you let all that on the table. You just got real and met your real self for the first time, unfiltered, raw, just who you are. And I said, I couldn't be more proud of you as a person because most people are scared to do that. And that's really where the growth comes from. I mean, I can share, in my life, I wouldn't have a sailboat right now if it wasn't for my grandfather and everything he did for me. I wouldn't have one of those. If my son had not died, the Empower Grief Journey podcast you and I are sitting on never would have happened. I never would have met you. I never would have a future climbing partner here in the state.
That's
Um,
right.
all these things that when you live in the rawness of that moment and you actually and you won't see this by the way right in the moment when it happens because we're humans, we feel things, but when you give yourself some time to process that, however long that takes you, and you start to see the gifts that unfold from these moments like that, being in the rawness of it, it becomes everything from tragedy to just beautifulness of life, and it becomes opportunity for you. And it matters because, like you said, if we lived for 1,000 years, the mentality might very well be, okay, well, that happens and it's going to happen 10,000 more times. So is it really a big deal? Is it really something I need to worry about? But our life here is so short. Most of us might live 70 to 90 years if we're lucky. And 70 to 90 years is not a lot of time. And so these things that do happen to us do matter. They hold weight in our life, but we also have that gift to turn what I like to call a gift in shitty wrapping paper into something awesome in our life. And For you, you became a divorce coach, or you take people out in the wilderness. Something I would love to do is take people out there so they can find themselves, because that's been transformative for me in my life. But then, I'm here doing my thing in that same capacity, and so I just think it's beautiful that we've taken that opportunity in life that was just a gift that wrapped in not so good paper, and we turned it into something powerful that is giving back to people and getting them to live in that rawness for a minute so they can actually find their gifts.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, a lot of the people, I won't say all, obviously, but a lot of the people who do tie themselves up and hide all those emotions look a lot like me and you, right? So kudos to you for being that example. And of course he blew up when he was around you because he felt safe. It felt good. It felt like a place that he could do that. We talk about our kids here that we don't always see the side of them that they see at home. Well, when they get home, they're explosive and they're this and that. I'm like, that's the most calm kid in the world. Well, they're holding it all in. They're keeping their shit together all day long. And then when they get home where they feel super safe and they don't have a crowd, it all comes out. Same thing. So you were able to create that space, right? And I think it helps. I hope it helps for people who look like me and you to provide an alternative image to some of those people who feel like they have to hold everything in.
I think it's big. I mean, like I said, we all have feelings and emotions. Just it's really about do we have a safe place for us to do that, to open up? And I had a coaching client yesterday. To get on the phone, she apologized for saying the F word, and I said, "You don't owe me an apology right now." I said, "This is your safe place. This is the non-judgmental space. Whatever way it needs to come out, let it come out. I have no problem with that." And like I said, like you said too, by the way, kids at school, they might bottle it up, but to a different extent, by the way, they might just feel safe enough to be who they actually need to be, and that's why they're not acting out. They might feel safe in that environment to just be themselves. I'll give that back to you too. If you're making a safe space for children to be who they need to be individually, that's a powerful, powerful thing, powerful gift.
F bombs and teenager tears. That's what gives me my strength, man. Bring it on.
I love it. Well, Alan, I this has been awesome to have you on my podcast, my
So
friend. And
good.
brother, I'm hoping we get to meet sometime soon. We got to go for a hike out here together. We
We
can.
are planning around right now, looking to head up to Olympic this year. So that's close enough. We'll find a way to hook up.
Nice. So, well, I want to ask you, as I do a lot of my guests on my show, I want to ask you this question. If you run into somebody who's going through grief or feels stuck in grief, what's one or two things that you would say to them that could help them navigate that journey just a little bit easier?
Yeah. Um, they don't want to hear it right away, but what's the learning? What's there for you that you can take from that? So often it is about, like I said earlier, what did I like about myself in the moment that I lost? Right? What did I like about myself when I was around Charles? What did I like about myself with this learner who died? What did I like about myself, even with my ex-wife? And so what part of that am I grieving? And so how can that instruct where I go next? And what's the lesson there? And then the other piece is this is an opportunity then. If you know that this thing is important to you, this piece of it, let's map out a few other things. Like what are your values that are non-negotiables? And then how can we find a way to feed those things in lots of different ways and not as a distraction, but as a that you feel like you missed that now. So how can we continue to get that? How can we not see that as something that is no longer available to me? Certainly not in that way, especially if it's a person who I lost, but how can I dig in there? What did I love about that? And let's see if we can make that happen.
I think that's a beautiful bit of advice because there are people no longer in our lives at this point that have taught us things along the way and shown us, by the way, who we are within and what we really value and what we enjoy doing and really just our authentic self. I think that's powerful advice, my friend. Um, I want to ask you too, as we wrap up the show, where can people find you if they want to get a hold of you?
Gosh, best place, crookedtrailcoaching.com. I'm there. For your listeners, there will be a page that folks can get on if have a bunch of resources they can download. There'll be some discounted packages if people want to join us for Maine, if they want to come along. There's a group coaching program that's coming up, one-to-one coaching. All of that stuff will be discounted. They just need to use the offer code Journey, like this podcast, and though it'll just be crookedtrailcoaching.com/journey. Other places, I'm on LinkedIn. You can just look up my name, Alan, two L's and an E, Franz, Frantz. I'm there. And Facebook at Crooked Trail Coaching.
Awesome, Alan. Well, I'm gonna definitely let the listeners know where to come find you. I'll have all the links, by the way, at the bottom of this podcast on Podbean, as well as my other site, YouTube, where I have the video version up. So you guys will be able to get a hold of Alan. I want to thank you so much for sharing that discount code and those free resources for people, because I
Oh, for
think that
sure.
and I'm just gonna say, guys, connecting with Alan's been an awesome time. He and I had a great chat on our first call, and I personally am looking forward to hitting the trail with this guy.
Real stuff. Real stuff. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank our listeners for joining Alan and I today on this episode of the Empower Grief Journey. If this is an episode that resonated with you, please share it with somebody that you know could benefit from Alan's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you during your grief journey, visit empowergriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can also find this on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. The Empower Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. I want you to know you're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.